So we're just getting started with the decibel, and we want to get your opinion. We've set up a brief survey, and if you fill it out, we'll give you the chance to win some prizes. Listen to the end of the show for details. I'm Tamara Kendacker, and this is The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. So we're all looking forward to the summer. Over half of Canadians now have their first dose of a vaccine, and if everything goes according to plan, life is going to be a bit freer. Summer is also an especially important time for students. It's not only a break from school, but also an opportunity to gain some work experience and make some money. And in this sense, last summer was really tough. Summer employment for students dropped by 40% from the previous year as the jobs they usually worked disappeared.
One of the really challenging things with this particular situation is that you have some young people who essentially have 2 lost years.
Matt Lundy is an economics reporter for the Globe and Mail. He's been talking to students about their experiences looking for work over the last year, and he's on the show today. Coming up on The Decibel, why young people are having a tougher time in the job market than most other groups, what the government is doing to help, and will they be able to bounce back this summer? Let's get into it. Hey, Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
First, can you just give me a quick view of what the job market overall in Canada was like before the pandemic hit, and then what happened when it did?
I think you could broadly say that the job market was in pretty good shape in Canada before the crisis hit. Our unemployment rate was pretty much close to an all-time low. So, if you're a younger person looking to get in the job market, that was a pretty ideal time. And of course, things have, they completely collapsed about 15 months ago.
And how did the pandemic impact the job market for young people in particular?
Well, they have suffered in a way that few demographic groups really have as far as jobs are concerned. As far as the job losses are concerned, we had a bunch that happened in March, and then April was the really, really catastrophic month. So by April, for people 15 to 24, the number of people employed in that age bracket was down by 35%. For people 25 and up, it was only down, around 12%. Of course, they have less seniority than other people, but they also just happen to work in precisely the worst industries for this type of crisis. So in the summer, summer of 2019, so, normal times, 2/3 of summer employment was in retail, hospitality, so basically like restaurants and hotels, tourism. And then the third category was something like culture and recreation. So this would be like summer camps, a local theater, things like that. So again, 2/3 of employment is in 3 areas that are extremely affected by COVID-19. Mm-hmm. Up to today, people between the ages of 15 and 24 account for more than half of all the job losses in Canada. So it's really been concentrated among young people. One thing that really stands out is if you look at numbers for women in particular, they have lost more than young men as far as jobs. And they also account for nearly all of the people who have dropped out of the labor market. So that's not just like people who are working, but people who have stopped looking for work. So I suppose in a best case scenario, you have a lot of people who are not looking for work because, let's say, young women are going back to school. A worst case scenario is that people that have become really discouraged over this situation and just aren't even bothering to look for work.
Mm-hmm. And when we say young people lost jobs, are we talking about a combination of layoffs and then also jobs that they would normally get that just aren't there as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so there's definitely really high layoff rates. When you consider that early March of last year, there were so many people who were about to graduate or so many students who had jobs lined up for the summer. There are surveys showing that 75% of them had job offers rescinded. So sometimes it wasn't even really so much a layoff so much as they were about to start something and it was snatched away from them within a couple of weeks.
And how did the government respond to this sudden disappearance of jobs for young people?
One of the key things is how the government reacted last year versus this year. So last year, there was a lot of noise and a lot of people asking, what about students? And the government brought in the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. So that paid, for most people, every 4 weeks, you could get $1,250. So over the course of the summer, you were able to get $5,000 pre-tax. If you had dependents or a disability, you were able to get $8,000. Now, fast forward to this year, and the student benefit is not coming back. So if you are one of those unlucky people who is just unable to find something this year, or let's say unwilling because you have health concerns and you don't want to take a fast food job, let's say.
Right.
There isn't that government backstop to help you out income-wise this year.
I know the Canada Emergency Student Benefit helped a lot of people. I know people who actually used that program. Why wasn't it renewed? And why aren't we seeing something similar this time around?
That's a great question. I've asked the government several times why they didn't bring back the student benefit. I've not ever gotten a direct reply on what that is. The student benefit last year was used by over 700,000 people. And in total, it cost $3 billion, which, look, on the surface, $3 billion, that sounds like a lot of money. When you consider the wage subsidy program, and I know on this podcast you've spoken about the wage subsidy program before, that has a budget of $110 billion. If you look at CERB, that was over $70 billion. If you total up everything that we've spent on the pandemic, $3 billion for students is less than 1% of what we spent. So, I'm not going to necessarily make the argument myself. I'm trying to stay out of things, but I think you could easily argue that the student benefit was a fairly small piece of the pie and that conceivably you could have brought it back last year for some people who are still continuing to struggle.
So where are we now heading into a new summer with just over half of Canada with at least one dose of the vaccine? Teens are getting vaccinated. So what's the summer job situation now?
Unquestionably, last year, the summer job market was worse, much, much worse. A lot of companies had no idea how they were going to survive this shock. I mean, we barely knew very much about the virus at the time that this hit in time for summer jobs. We do know that there are a lot more summer job postings this year than there were last year. Companies have a bit of an idea of where things are heading. We have vaccines rolling out. We have reopening plans that are hopefully on a permanent basis. So things have definitely improved on that front. Like if you go up to April, for young people, employment is down 10%, which still is quite significant, but a lot better than, the 35% range we saw. We have in this country recovered 83% of our pandemic job losses. I've spoken with Indeed, which is the job search site, and they've definitely seen that summer-related job postings are stronger than they were last year, but not quite as good as in 2019.
I know you've talked to a bunch of students as part of your reporting. What kind of challenges are they dealing with right now as a result of not being able to find work? What kind of stories have you heard?
One woman I spoke to in Nova Scotia, she has severe asthma. She was in cancer treatment a couple of years ago. Her health is not back to normal. And on doctors' recommendations, they say, don't go out there like in any sort of public-facing thing. You want to limit your exposures. So automatically, that means you're going to have to find something remote work-wise, and she's struggled to find something in that vein. Depending where you are regionally as well, I've spoken to people in Toronto, and Toronto is just, further behind other places as far as what it allows. So certain types of work are just off the table. And then there are some cases where people can only find, let's say, part-time hours. So they're just not getting as much as they need in order to finance their studies.
Mm-hmm. What are you hearing from students about how they are making money? Like, I know there was one example in your story about a girl who started an OnlyFans account, and she was saying that this is pretty common now, that people are going on websites like this to make a bit of extra cash. And for people who might not know, can you just quickly explain what OnlyFans is?
Yeah, I mean, I must say I've never been on myself, so
Yeah.
I'm really going off the Wikipedia definition, but it's a subscription service where, I mean, traditionally it has been more sort of explicit, I guess, adult content where you can subscribe and view people's material. It's in that case, the student needed extra money. She said it was quite common at her university in Nova Scotia. And, you know, the pictures were not especially scandalous. It's maybe something people would already post on Instagram, but it was a thing that you could do. And she made, you know, $1,000 extra over 3 months, not earth-shattering amounts of money, but it was something that was fairly easy. And the way she put it was like, you know, to earn that amount of money, like for the amount of time that I put into that versus getting $1,000 from my grocery store job, like I would have had to work hundreds of more hours. So, you know, there are a lot of people who are finding different ways. I mean, I spoke to people who are YouTubers and have made money that way. Of course, there's the typical sort of like, you know, doing yard work for neighbors and that sort of thing. So, I mean, people are trying to cobble together money any way they can.
Yeah. So what do we know about how graduating into such a difficult job market affects a person's career and their earnings long term?
Well, what we know is not good. So years ago, there was a study conducted specifically about Canadian men who graduated in recessions in the 1980s and 1990s. And what they found was that the year after graduation, let's call them the unlucky cohort that graduated during a recession, they were earning on average 15% less than those who graduated in better times. And worse yet, it took them a full decade to close the income gap with the more lucky graduates. So just by virtue of having bad timing, that can really affect your career trajectory. It can affect your earnings. It can mean that certain life goals that you have, whether it's paying off debt, whether it's starting a family, whether it's buying a house, all sorts of things, these things get pushed further down the road.
Yeah. And can you unpack that just a little bit more? Why is it that having one bad year can have such a long-term impact on someone?
What they found was that when you are graduating in a bad economic time, you end up settling for a job that others before you might not be. So you're taking a job that's not necessarily in your field, or employers know that, frankly, like you're desperate. Their job offers in a recession, their salary offers are not necessarily going to be as good. You know, they found that a way that people could speed this up was actually by leaving companies and like proactively getting out of those situations and moving to other firms. So, which can be a tough thing because if you graduate in a recession, you're thinking, you know, I'm just happy to have this job.
So essentially, if you graduate during a difficult economic period, your baseline just may be lower because you're forced to settle for less.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is when jobs open up again, recent grads are going to be forced to compete with a new cohort of grads for the same positions.
One of the really challenging things with this particular situation is that you have some young people who essentially have 2 lost years. We will have gone through this where there are 2 lost summers for young people. And, you know, knock on wood, let's say we're somewhat back to normal next year as far as the job market goes and restrictions. There's so many people, as you mentioned, coming up behind them that are going to be competing where they maybe have a cleaner trajectory on their resumes. That just adds more competition for people who have been really struggling the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm. So, Matt, as we're looking towards recovering from the pandemic, do you think we're going to see a kind of pendulum effect in the near future when jobs that disappeared during the pandemic come roaring back, when we all want to go to the movies, go shop in brick and mortar stores or whatever?
One thing that we've seen over the course of this pandemic, when we do open things up a little bit at a time, and of course we go back into lockdown, but during those times of opening up, employers have really ramped up their hiring. Like they have been ready to go this entire time. So one thing that they're probably going to need to see as far as getting that pendulum swing you're talking about, we're going to need some indication that as we're reopening, perhaps that we are turning a corner here and that employers can bring people back on a more permanent basis. There are some government programs to encourage hiring over the summer months as well. That might help. But of course, you also have companies that have taken on a lot of debt at this time. They're not in great shape. The average small business has taken on $170,000 in extra debt just because of COVID. Are they going to be in financial shape to bring people back on at the same levels? Maybe they just bring back 50% of their employees. All of these things remain to be seen.
Okay, Matt, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandaker. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. David Crosby edits the show. Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thank you so much to Matt Lundy. You can find him on Twitter at MattLundy33. If you haven't already, follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you want to say hello, email us at thedecibel@theglobeandmail.com. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. And here are the details on that survey. We want to know about you and what you'd like to hear on The Decibel. Just go to thedecibelsurvey.ca, fill it out, and as a token of our appreciation, we'll enter your name to win one of 3 $50 grocery gift cards. Once again, that's thedecibelsurvey.ca. Please do it. It'll really help us make this show better. Thank you so much.